We are now live on YouTube. Very good. And we are now live on YouTube.
All right. It looks like we got a participant in here on their way. Hello.
Hello.
How are you, Tricarico?
I'm doing good. I'm gonna be rude and eat some food because I haven't had dinner yet. Sorry.
Understandable. And we're live on YouTube, just so you're aware.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Eating live on YouTube. Well, you know, it looks like we may have a few others join us, and I think that would be great. One thing I noticed about our last meeting is that we did have quite a few more viewers of the meeting than actual participants on the YouTube. So I do want to go ahead and at least walk through the motions of the meeting, even though we may not necessarily have quorum, if that works for you. And I'm going to go ahead and do something a little different than what I've done before, which is to read a statement. And the reason I want to do that is because we are kind of elevated out on this platform of YouTube. And I want to just make some, oh, Alex is coming, great. I just want to make a few remarks about kind of the current environment to kind of frame up our conversations tonight and what we have on the agenda. It'll take me about 5 minutes to read off what I wrote. So I wanted to start off by acknowledging what's going on in the broader world and how it's intersecting with our work on the LGBTQ rights task force. You're all aware of the recent racist violence and anti-racist protests nationwide, as well as the incidents here in downtown Salem. At the Human Rights Commission, we're having a lot of discussions of racism, policing, and many other issues. We've talked about the gap between Black people's lived experiences and what officially gets reported to the HRC or the Salem PD's Internal Affairs Department. And I suspect that gaps like that also exist within our LGBT community. That said, these issues around policing are probably better addressed by that broader Human Rights Commission. And I raise them here only because we should never lose sight of the connection between racism, queerphobia, and transphobia. All hate is hate. And so it's important that we talk about it. Separately, though, I wanted to share a related issue in a little bit more depth. Here in Salem, we've seen a few examples of unfortunate behavior among some elected officials. Most notably on March 30th, a white Salem Kaiser school board member donned a mask with a Black person's face on it to make a political point during an official meeting on Zoom. No other board members stepped in to question whether this was appropriate behavior. He later apologized and the local NAACP made a statement accepting that apology. But weeks later, the school board has now failed to act on appeals from the community to revamp its school resource officer program in a white-centered process that called into question their commitment to anti-racism. Last night, the Salem Kaiser Superintendent Christy Perry publicly rebuked the school board members, actually taking her own employers to task and risking her job to try to set a new tone going forward. Now, there's a ton of background on this issue, and I'm not going to share it here. I wanted to call attention, though, to one part of the superintendent's message where she linked racism to bias against LGBTQ people. What she said was, we've seen from our board in the SRO process, or what we've seen from our board in the SRO process isn't unique. It's been prevalent, from wanting to rewrite the equity lens to failing to stand up for our transgender students when a small portion of our community wasn't ready to recognize Transgender Day of Visibility. Even reading the Pride Month proclamation becomes a hot button issue, with it always falling to Director Blasey because she's the only member who isn't afraid to say the words. I thought that was that her entire piece, which is on Facebook, was a stunning rebuke and I think is worth everybody checking out if you get a chance. But as I thought about my disappointment in some of our elected school board officials, it occurred to me that everyone who enters public service has a responsibility, and that includes us. We, as appointed members of the LGBTQ Rights Task Force and the Human Rights Commission, have a responsibility to set a tone and expectations for how we'll conduct ourselves when our community appeals to us to make change. We must have certain operating agreements around how we will interact with one another and how we will behave in these public meetings, so we're not recreating the traumatic experiences that are so prevalent in other appointed and elected bodies. With our meetings now being broadcast online, what we do and say here is now elevated. And that means we must be even more responsible and thoughtful in our words and actions. Hence why I have a prepared statement tonight. So tonight we're going to have updates on various activities as a task force, and we'll have a discussion about pronouns in our meetings and ways we can be more mindful and inclusive at both this meeting and at the Human Rights Commission meetings. And we have a ton of work to do. Nationally, this year, 16 transgender people have been murdered so far. 11 of them were people of color. We're on pace to have a similar number of homicides in 2020 as we did in 2019, even during a global pandemic where many people are staying indoors. And here in Salem, according to our recent Human Rights Commission survey, LGBTQ people rated the city a 2.18 out of 5 for inclusiveness. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at my grade school, that would have counted as an F. Many of us LGBTQ people see evidence of bias and microaggressions regularly, if not daily, in this community. Recently, one of our commissioners was walking in Riverfront Park and saw a particular quote from Leviticus spelled out in the sidewalk chalk. You know the quote I'm talking about. This was near an area where a church camp for children was operating. It seems even children in our community are being primed to hate and judge. I fear most for those children who are LGBTQ and are at increased risk for suicide and other consequences because they are exposed to hate so young. So I think all this means we really need to get to work. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives and moving forward on important work for our community within this task force. And I'm grateful to serve with each of you. So just in kind of sharing that, I just wanted to kind of set the tone a little bit for our meeting, and really we're going to have some conversations about how we conduct our meeting and how the HRC meetings are conducted as well, to make sure that we're not spreading trauma and hate through our forum, that our forum is really used to advance issues of human rights. And so now I have to pull up the agenda. Give me a second.
While you're doing that, Mike, thank you. I'm appreciative of your comments.
Yes, me too. I'm really appreciative of that, and I'm looking forward to discussing this and bringing this to the greater council. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it was really meaningful to start off with that, and I think we should do something like that for the broader HRC meeting as well.
Thank you. Good thing.
If you like, Mike, I wonder if you'd be open to emailing it to me and I can pass that suggestion on to our chair and vice chair.
Yeah, I would happily do so.
Thank you.
Yeah. So looking at tonight's agenda, well, it doesn't appear that we have any public comment. So I'm going to skip ahead to minutes. Did everybody take a look at the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I can second that.
Second that. Or third.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 And I see no opposed. Great. Our next topic was around the survey for the unsheltered. Any update on that, Gretchen?
Well, just that I appreciate everybody receiving my emails and many of the groups ended up with a name by them, and you all were very kind. I think we learned of 1 or 2 new groups as we shared the information. And again, just to recap the quick reminder of our project, we're recognizing the need for information sharing as people move into the community, or as people begin to seek or be curious about resources. It can be helpful to have a central place to find them. And so we've decided to amend our brochure and which Mike has done for us, to communicate that on our webpage, there's a link of local resources available for LGBTQ communities. And so we've amended the brochure, and we have the webpage. So now what we're interested in is reaching out to the various organizations we're aware of to confirm their willingness to be noted on our page. And so that's the work that you all have been engaging in over the past week. So I'm happy to be receiving confirmations of yes, no, and then I can start popping them up on the webpage. So I don't know if you want to kind of, Mike, I don't know if you want to kind of call on each person and see where we are with the outreach that people may have been able to do. I was delayed in getting it out to you, so I don't know that you had as much time as you anticipated being able to have. So I respect that. If you need more time, this will be an iterative project. We'll be able to add and delete on an ongoing basis. So if you weren't able to by today, I can always take that information later too.
Does anyone have an update from their groups they'd want to? Byron.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was looking into the Salem Social Justice Collective, Confluence, Willamette Valley LGBTQ Forests, and the Salem, Oregon Gay and Lesbian Hotline. At this time, it seems that the Salem Social Justice Collective is no longer active. And it was a group that I was a member of a couple of years back. The membership of the group has moved on to other projects. Confluence Willamette Valley is, of course, still active, and I'll be able to confirm whether they'd like to be part of the list at their next annual meeting, which is this Sunday. And the Salem Gay and Lesbian Hotline is, to my knowledge, no longer able to receive calls. But I will be confirming again later this week that previous calls did not go through.
Thank you.
I think
I'm just
Gretchen
taking
assigned me
notes.
to about 4. Gretchen assigned me to about 4. I don't have an update as yet, but I will do by the end of this week, and I'll send Gretchen an email.
I don't have any updates either. I'm sorry. I've been involved in a lot of things. I do know that because I'm the one who founded They Them Thursdays, that we've been on hiatus for a bit because of everything that's going on. So I'm hoping to get like a digital version up and running soon, since it's probably going to be a while before we can do in-person stuff again. So I will update everybody once that's going, and I will look at a couple areas I can also do some research on. I don't remember the groups off the top of my head, but there's a few that I was like, oh, I think I know the person. So I'll email Gretchen an update.
My 3 groups were Rainbow Youth, Capital Pride, and help me with my third one. I know it. The ISCWE, the Willamette Empire. I know that all 3 of those groups are active. I've been in contact with Capital Pride, and I have an update for later in the agenda. I have not talked to any of them about inclusion on the list, but I will attempt to reach out this week.
Great, I appreciate it. And then I'll just watch for everybody's updates. And then as I get the yeses, I can just kind of start populating it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great.
Oh, also, I did reach out to Basic Rights Oregon. I just haven't heard back yet. Sorry, I'm looking at the list.
Gretchen, I think we skipped over the topic and I doubt you have an update on it, but just for the purposes of following the agenda, on the unsheltered, I assume we're still in a holding pattern with those
Well,
surveys.
yes and no. I actually do have an update, and I'm sorry, my eye jumped over that too. Okay, so you all might remember that a couple of months ago, I started to also work in the area of being a liaison on unsheltered homelessness types of issues. And that path led me to participate in a recent community meeting, the Mid Willamette Valley Homeless Alliance. I'm going to goof up the formal name. But our regional committee has a subcommittee, a coordinating committee that has lots of folks together, and a structure of a strategic plan. And Krista Gallagher, the vice chair of the Human Rights Commission, and I both attended the last meeting, and we're taking a look at the structure and the way the committee operates. And I've also had the opportunity to connect with one of the consultants to the process. It's a long-winded way of saying that they've identified goals that are in common with the objective of our survey. And to Krista and I, the strategic plan objectives were aligned with the sorts of things we were wanting to know. And we also observed the process where subcommittees can be kind of created as part of that structure. And you have the benefit of all of those participants. There's a lot of participants from virtually all of the shelters and serving organizations around the tables. So Krista and I attended the last meeting, and then she and I connected afterwards and thought about a way to obtain the information that we had contemplated in the survey could be to suggest a committee. And Krista and I kind of intimated to that at the meeting, and people were interested in collaborating. So we're thinking that that will be the way to collect the information and use it in that broader context, if you will. So Krista was, I believe Krista's plan is to share that back with the broader Human Rights Commission at the July meeting as an idea to suggest that we initiate and provide leadership on a committee within the regional homelessness structure, and that it would include the interest in the LGBTQ questions that we had, and also for people with disabilities, that those would be the two areas. They also took a look at a broader statement around non-discrimination that and we noticed it included all of the communities that the group was ratifying and supporting as a structure, and it ratified that there will not be discrimination, and it listed each of the identities that we see in chapter 97, including disability and gender identity, and the ones that we've contemplated in the survey. So I think we've found a method to do it in a way that will make sense and tap the partners that we were needing to connect with.
All that you say makes a lot of sense to me. I wonder what the other task force members think. So reading the Zoom, as they say, it appears that the task force likes the idea of the broader commission being involved in the survey questions, and trusting and ensuring our fellow commission members will include LGBTQ as among the components that are discussed.
I keep forgetting that I have to unmute, so it takes me a little while to get into it. But I like the idea. I think it's great to have partners. And with the questions, Gretchen, will we have an opportunity to also look at the questions as a task force and kind of make sure that we have what we want on it?
Absolutely. In fact, probably a good step before the next regional coordinating committee would be for me to review our minutes and although we wouldn't be at survey point yet, I suppose, but I should review our minutes, and because we did start to do some work around the questions that's reflected in the minutes. And I think what would be wise is for me to send all of that out to all of you and make sure that we're on the same page. Then Krista could be bringing that forward at the July Human Rights Commission meeting and confirming, so that when we go to the coordinating committee, we can be pretty specific with, this is the information the Human Rights Commission's wanting to gather, and so that we can then start working on gaps and solutions for where we see issues or gaps, you know? I remember we'd contemplated questions around policy and the practice and the experiences of people needing to access both shelters and other services that might be related. So I'll find what I've got and send it out in an email if that's okay, and invite your comments.
That sounds excellent to me. Any further comments or questions? Our next agenda item is a logistical item around the length of our meetings. Tonight, I asked for our meeting to be an hour so that we could also have a follow-up with a work group that's working on awareness for Human Rights Commission. But it occurred to me that 60 minutes is, especially in the Zoom format, is a pretty good sized meeting. And I wondered if anybody had any heartburn about going from 90 minutes to 60 minutes. I would imagine that if there was a hot issue in our community, we could always choose to extend a particular meeting, but we could set these as 60 minutes and just see how it goes. So let me know your thoughts and comments about meeting length.
Yeah, I would be in favor of moving to a 60-minute format and then extending it.
Sounds good to me too.
Works for me.
Cool. I don't even think we need to vote. That's a rousing yes for 60 minutes. Woohoo! That's great. Okay, so I think that the next topic is really the meat of our meeting, and it's around recognition of pronouns, not only within this meeting, but I don't know if you all are aware, but there was a comment on our Human Rights Commission meeting when a commissioner was misgendered. And it occurred to me that our fellow, and none of our fellow commissioners stepped in, including myself. And it occurred to me that having some agreements around pronouns and how they're shared, if they're shared, would be really valuable for both our LGBTQ rights task force and the Human Rights Commission. And we could make a recommendation to the commission around how that is done in order to kind of promote the best practice and inclusiveness. But, you know, it's also like a hot issue. So I definitely want to hear from members, particularly members of our trans community, around you know, that approach and what would be the best way to implement something like that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that conversation, because I was messaging a person live during our meeting who was pretty upset about the misgendering, you know, from their perspective, since they also use neopronouns. They're thinking, wow, you know, if I talk to a commissioner on the Human Rights Board, and I especially am having to recount a trauma or something, am I going to be further traumatized by being misgendered? And so I wanted to talk about this anyway, so I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mike, because I definitely don't expect perfection, but the perception from the public is not good when we're in a public meeting that's live broadcasted and we aren't being respectful of pronouns. So I would really like to see us introduce ourselves with pronouns. Now, I don't want to make that mandatory, and there's a personal reason for that is I know that I wasn't comfortable putting my pronouns until I was really out and in a good place to do that. So I'm never going to force people. However, I'm going to always strongly encourage it, just because it normalizes it. So it's not only the trans folks putting their pronouns. And also because, like, you can't look at someone and know their pronouns, right? You need to ask. So I would like to have that, part of our standard introduction, pending the conversation with the rest of the HRC. I'd like to have it added to our placeholder things that have the ward little tents, you know what I'm talking about, Gretchen. Again, just to normalize it. And also I do want us to be more responsible about holding each other accountable. Because again, I don't expect perfection. We're going to mess it up. I mess up pronouns all the time. I will be honest. I am not perfect at it. However, I try to correct myself, and we should be correcting each other, because really we don't often even realize we're doing it. We're breaking habits that we've had our whole life to categorize male and female, right? And that takes a long time to break and take some practice. And if we don't realize it in the moment, it can be really hard to break that habit. So it's actually more powerful to say in the moment, like, hey, don't forget. I actually joked with another commissioner about bringing a little sign I could hold up at the Zoom meetings that says they, them, just to make it fun and remind people, and you don't need to have this huge drawn out apology. If it happens, just fix it and move on. That's all I need. I mean, that's me personally. I'm not going to speak for all trans people by any stretch of the imagination, but just a quick fix and move on can be really powerful. When other people step in and remind, it's really powerful, because sometimes we're just tired of having to deal with it and we just don't want to make a big deal. But Mike is correct in that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And I'm really excited that you brought it up, because it is important and it is something we need to be mindful of in these meetings. So thank you for opening that discussion. I really appreciate it.
Byron, it looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, let's.
About to speak?
Yes, yeah, I'm just gathering my thoughts. But yeah, Chikiriko, thank you for sharing your perspective. And something that I endorse would be promoting a culture where pronouns are something that we are more aware of, and we're ensuring that we are mindful of when we address others, and it would be something as a task force and as a commission that I hope that we can hold ourselves accountable to, and will join myself. And on the note, I wonder if it would be appropriate to consider that as a broader conversation for other commissions, other task forces, and meetings from the city. This is a recommendation we could consider making.
Yeah, I really like that, Byron. And it occurs to me a couple of things. One, there are a few things that you said, Chikiriko, that I think are a little bit around training as well. Training for how to understand how to respond, that the best practice, whether it's people's preference or not, the best practice that we've heard is, if you make a mistake, quickly correct yourself and move on. And so that, I think, message would be really useful out in our commission. But I see that Alex is unmuted and I took her spot. So I'm going to defer to Alex for some more comment.
Now, I was going to say the same thing. I think a lot of it is in training. And as Chikiriko said, we're so rooted in just looking at gender as male and female. For a lot of people, they say, I need to get more practice. At work, where we're trying to enforce everyone to have it in their email signatures, talk more about it. And a couple of very common comments that I get is, it does not sound grammatically correct when I use they, them, theirs. And then we have to say, well, it's beyond grammar at this point, just how do you use it in a sentence? A lot of people say they're not able to use it correctly in a sentence. I had someone say, they wanted to say, can you hand this file over to them? But it turned out to be, can you hand this file over to they? So I understand that many people are not making those mistakes intentionally, they're and they're trying, but I think it's a lot to do with training and us just getting used to using pronouns properly. So it'll be a great way to start at all our commission meetings. Gretchen, didn't we do this earlier? I remember us doing this, like introducing ourselves with pronouns a couple years, 2 years ago maybe, and then it sort of just died down. We didn't.
I
Do we know
agree.
why we
I
stopped?
think oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, do we know why we stopped? I don't remember why we stopped.
If my memory is accurate, I think just given the size of the group and as everybody came to know each other, even the experience of an introduction kind of fell by the wayside with everybody, hello, how are you, and knowing each other already. So, but that doesn't address when we have newer people join or guests arrive or the experience of being digital. And so sometimes some of those experiences of intros are helpful because they can reinforce things that, so maybe they should be kept even though everybody gets to know each other. And I also wanted to mention, building on everyone's points around offering information and training, as you contemplate a recommendation that would go out to others, like other boards and commissions, I almost wonder if a letter with some of these suggestions might be one pathway, or a little video, or some offering of like, here's our recommendation and some suggestions for its implementation, I think could be helpful.
Yeah, I know that Basic Rights Oregon did a really great training on gender identity and pronouns at my place of work a couple years ago, so I can ask them about that. I've also got a ton of resources at work, so I'd have to email that to myself tomorrow and then pass it along. But yeah, I agree, training and practice, because you do have to retrain your brain to not immediately jump to those gendered pronouns, right? Even if you're looking at a person who does use gendered pronouns, because you can't tell. So this is something I talk about like pretty much nonstop. So I'm always happy to talk about it and ask questions and get people thinking. So I'll share some resources, and then I don't know, Mike, do you want to bring this up at the next like main HRC meeting, or you want to talk to Gretchen and Angela?
Yeah,
Krista and Angela first.
I think as the chair of LGBTQ rights that I can bring it up during our update.
Okay.
And I think that would be the most appropriate place to raise it. And then perhaps if the commission bites, which I think they will, then we could see about getting it added as a more sort of formal agenda item in future.
Yeah.
So that we could really have the discussion. I love this discussion, and I'm obsessed with pronouns as well. You know, my pronouns are he, him, or they, them, in recognition of the fact that I'm pretty cisgendered. You just can't get away from all this, but I do think I do think of myself as a non-binary person, and sometimes you can feel invisible when you're experiencing being a non-binary person and being perceived as very masculine or whatever. So I just really appreciate this discussion. I also wanted to bounce off of Alex a little bit, who had mentioned grammar, because I'm a huge grammar nerd. Of course, you know, I do this for a living, so this is what I live for. And actually, using the singular they is like super excellent grammar. The use of he or she as a construction didn't really come into vogue until like mid-century. And it used to be that it was totally appropriate to refer to people whose gender you didn't know, or to groups of people as using the they or them pronouns. So I think it's a fun discussion as well to talk about pronouns. And I think that makes for a good training opportunity for our commissions.
Yeah, and I'd also love to make sure that when we have that broader discussion, we also talk about neopronouns. You know, I have friends who use ze, zers, and fey, and, you know, I feel like those ones can be challenging for folks too. So I want to bring awareness, because there's some that I didn't really hear about until I met people with those pronouns. And if we hear about them now, we can practice it now, and, you know, talk about some strategies for doing that practice and internal training like Alex talked about. Is we do need to give some time for people to get used to it. So let's have those tools ready.
At my workplace this week, we had another resource, Trans Affirming Spaces, came to speak to us. It's a group of 2 individuals out of Portland who do training. and a really good quality training, but they raised that issue as well around, and I love the way they put it. They said, don't think of the golden rule, because that's treat others as you would want to be treated. Think of the platinum rule, which is to treat others as they would like to be treated. And I think that's such a powerful concept when you start to understand it. And then you start to understand that using the person's correct pronouns is just no big deal. You should just do it.
I was personally really grateful that the community member wrote in. I realized I hadn't been aware of the misgendering until the person had said that. And I thought, where was I? I'm listening intently to the conversation. Granted, I'm taking notes. And sometimes I think I have a bit of a hearing challenge, but it's like, why didn't I honestly didn't hear it, you know? And I was like, that's horrible. What is that? Is it mean it was just like, I don't know why, but I found that really fascinating. And I was thinking a lot about it. And I thought it was really important that the person raised it, because it literally would have gone just right past me otherwise, you know? So it was important for me to hear that. I'd like to think that I would have said something, you know? I have in other situations, so I'd like to think I would have said something.
So it seems like we can talk about it in our update of LGBTQ rights. And would it be appropriate, Gretchen, at that point to go ahead and just recommend that the HRC adopt that practice? It's a pretty easy practice to get into the works, you know, just when we introduce ourselves, to introduce our name and pronoun. And then the secondary recommendation would be bringing this practice to other commissions. And that, I think, would require a little more explanation and training materials. But what do you guys think about that thought or idea?
I would be in favor.
Cool. Well, I think we're not taking any kind of formal action, so I don't know that we need to take a vote, but I think we're all unanimous on pronouns anyway, which is good. The last topic for tonight is just member remarks and announcements. And I only have one announcement, which is that Capitol Pride is moving to a virtual celebration. You all know that I sent Gretchen that screenshot of their statement around what they're planning to do. They are looking for volunteers, and they're going to meet on July 3rd in a virtual meeting format like this. The information is out on Facebook. Is there anyone on this group who's like anti-Facebook, not on Facebook, wouldn't be able to find it? Because I could probably find you a link some other way. So definitely check out Pride if you're interested in helping out. It sounds like it'll be a good celebration. I had wanted to attend their first meeting. I was unable to. I'm going to try to attend this next one, fingers crossed. But I did reach out to them and said that we had some task force members who were interested in helping with the celebration, and if there was a virtual component as well. We may wish to talk with our Human Rights Commission about whether the broader Human Rights Commission wants to participate in that virtual event. I don't really know what those events are going to look like. It sounds like they're thinking about a series of small events to capture different types of groups. So anyway, does anybody have any thoughts or anything they want to share about Pride? Are there any other member remarks or announcements?
Yeah, so I've been in contact with someone who expressed concern about some policies at one of the local plasma donation centers. They were told they couldn't donate if they had an X on their ID. So they asked me to reach out and kind of do some investigating, and I called the center, but they told me they couldn't discuss it over the phone, so I have to go in person. Okay, so I will be hopefully going down there Thursday or Friday in person and making sure that that's not the case. I'm trying to do it a little bit under the radar so this person then isn't outed as having complained, you know, because there's obviously not as many folks with the X, but I definitely want to make sure that's not happening and make sure that people who are transgender are not being forced to use a gender identity that is not in alignment with who they are. So we'll see how that goes. I will update y'all when I hear more, as well as the greater commission. But that's kind of what I'm stewing on now. So Gretchen has been helping me with that, and hopefully we can just have a conversation and they can understand how to be inclusive. But I'll maybe relying on y'all for support if we need to go further with that.
Do you know if the issue is related to the broader issue involving men who've had relationships with men, like that whole thing, and because they can't tell the gender from the, I don't know. I'm just curious what if they had any reason.
No, there's a lot more background that the person told me, and that's not the impression that I got. It was more about they just don't allow you to not pick a gender was kind of the impression that I'm getting, which doesn't really make sense. And then they were also kind of pulling the like, well, your ID doesn't match something, and that's not a reason either. So I don't know what the exact policy is because they wouldn't tell me, but it does appear that it's been an issue at a couple places. So I may be reaching out to other plasma centers to make sure that, you know, this isn't happening. Because I know when I donated blood, I also have an X on my ID, full disclosure, and they were fine with it. They just said, hey, you know, for the purpose of this interview, we're going to go with this option because we don't have a third option. Like, is that okay with you? Would you like to use? I mean, they were really cool. They let me choose, right? But it sounds like that was not the treatment at all that this person got, which is why I'm having these conversations and figuring out what the official stance is, so that other people aren't deterred from going there or having a hard time or being misgendered when they're trying to use their services.
So it sounds like they don't have an explicitly like written policy where if you have an X on your ID, you cannot donate blood. It's just certain centers that are doing this.
Yeah, so I think the privately owned plasma centers are a lot different than the Red Cross. And I've definitely noticed a difference in experience between the staff there and other places. So I feel like they maybe aren't being held to the high standard that they should be, like any medical facility should be. So like I said, hopefully it's just a conversation where we can educate them and help them understand that it's not okay to do that, and maybe even quote some Chapter 97, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know what the official policy is because they won't tell me. So I'll find out.
It seems, you know, there is a broader issue of a lot of experiences or places that have you put your gender marker, that it's very rare that there's a third option, or third or more preferably, like there was on our survey.
Yeah.
So it's a worthwhile to look at it, especially in that area when plasma is so needed right now, especially for certain blood types.
Yeah, I mean, plasma is needed. You know, some of those centers provide cash, and there's people who really need cash right now, you know, with everything that's going on with the economy. You know, it's really important. And we know that trans folks are often hit hardest in economic downturn. So it's really important that that's an accessible service to the trans community, and they can have a good experience when they go in there. And that doesn't appear to have been happening. So there will definitely be follow-up to make sure that this isn't an experience that happens again for other trans folks trying to use the service.
Were there other member remarks and announcements? Well, I'm just really grateful that everybody came tonight, and I think we're doing really cool work for the city of Salem, and I'm excited for our next get together. See how we did. We'll talk about these things then at the Greater Human Rights Commission, some of the things that came up today, and we'll get you updated next month if you're not on the HRC already.
If my memory serves me, I may not be at the July meeting. I'm trying to remember the calendar right now, but we've just scheduled some time for me to take my daughter to some basketball, which I think will conflict with our meeting. So there might be someone else in my stead next month, FYI. And for those of you who are also on the Awareness Campaign Task Force, that's a different link. So we'll move in, we'll conclude this and then click on that.
Well, thanks everyone. I think that's the conclusion of our meeting. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.